Do muscles actually get confused, or is that just hoopla? Let's dive in.
Welcome to a Healthy Control podcast, providing education to create a healthy, balanced lifestyle, empowering you to take control of your health and not let health take control of you.
I'm very excited to get into today's question, and I'm one who drives myself on accountability and honesty, and if you haven't noticed, there's always the research down in the description for a reason. I'm not trying to make claims that I can't back up, and I do come out and say sometimes, this is my opinion, blah, blah, blah. I hope I have been able to gain your trust, and I hope I can continue to do that with today's episode. When it comes to claims like muscle confusion, I get a little bothered. I don't like it. Because it gets delivered in such a deceiving way, usually to get you to follow somebody or buy something or, whatever. We as humans have been exercising literally forever. If you take the word exercise to pretty much mean just moving around. But if you think back way back when, they were living in caves and they were building huts or, they were moving trees. Like they were constantly moving. We talked back in one of the very first episode or two about how much more they were moving. I think it was 3 times more than we do today. So yeah, we've been exercising for a long time. Now back then it was maybe more so moving stones and ripping tree branches off and not really these nice, neat little silver plates that we get to lift today, but nonetheless, it's still exercise. So because I don't like the term muscle confusion, I don't want to speak of it too much, or at least not the term. So I'm going to address it by its more scientific term, exercise variation. See, doesn't that sound so much less marketable? Hey, let's talk about exercise variation. Nah, we need something cool to call it, like confusion. So I'm going to adapt this quote from the great Dolores Umbridge that confusion for the sake of confusion shall be prohibited. Now, I want to promise this is not a 20-minute rant on terminology and marketing, but, a little bit doesn't hurt. I want to discuss with you today how to actually utilize exercise variation properly as well as its drawbacks. So where to start? Exercise variation. Well, we should probably start with the definition. That's a good place. So exercise variation is differing what you're doing from last time. Pretty plain and simple. It's just putting variation into your exercises. Now, this doesn't have to be as crazy as it sounds. If you routinely do 3 sets of 10 on the squat, and today you did 3 sets of 8, that's variation. You did 8 instead of 10. Another variation is your rest breaks. Maybe typically you do a minute, and today you do 45 seconds. That's more variation. You see how calling that muscle confusion kind of sounds stupid? So whether you take 5 minutes or, take 2, or maybe even turning your exercise into a superset or circuit, that's all just variation. And those all affect the stress to the muscle group. You can also change the tempo of the exercise. That's another way to put variety into it. Now squat, I've already kind of said it a couple times, so we'll keep rolling with that one. So instead of squatting down and back up, you could squat down slowly, let's say 8 seconds, pause at the bottom for 5 seconds, and then explode back up. Again, another variation. I think oftentimes with muscle confusion, supersets or circuits get involved, as well as completely changing the exercise or, goodness gracious, combining multiple things at once, like a squat on a Bosu ball with your eyes closed and middle of June. I don't know. It's just dumb. That is not muscle confusion. That's just being stupid. With exercise variation, it's a systematic approach to progress towards your goals, which is what it really comes down to. What the heck are your goals? So let's talk through a few scenarios with that. And probably start with the broadest of all. If you or your child or someone wants to be an athlete, it's typically, we've seen in the research, it's typically better to be a multi-sport athlete than a single sport athlete through most of growing up. At some point you have to specialize. There's nobody in the NFL and MLB right now for a good reason. But working through multiple sports teaches your body how to move in different ways, and that could be its own episode, but we'll leave it like that. But if you're a little bit older, per se, and you don't want to be an athlete or can't be an athlete, or your parents only allow you to be 5'6.5", and you just are not destined for the NFL, Maybe primarily strength or hypertrophy is more important to you. You just want to be as strong or as big as you can for whatever given reason. Let's say you're doing something like powerlifting or Olympic lifting, for example. Those are very specific exercises that you have to do. Muscle variation plays a role in your accessory lifts and in the off season. So you're not doing the exact same squatting year round and really tearing your body up. You can change how you do it, maybe doing a front squat instead or something like that to address your weaknesses. Maybe you struggle at the very bottom of the squat, so you do some box squats or explosive pause squats or pinch squats or whatever other types of squats you want to do, but that is muscle variation. But let's say, you're not an athlete, you're not a barbell athlete like an Olympic or powerlifter, and you just want to stay fit, relatively young, mobile, that sort of thing. Nothing wrong with that, but how can you utilize and benefit exercise variation? First of all, it's a pretty good idea to change up your exercise. This is me personally, but every 12 weeks or so, at least 12 weeks, I'll assess what I have been doing. Lately, I've actually kind of adopted this sort of A-B workout. So, like last week, I did bench press, and then this week I did floor press. But it's just A-B. It's not the entire alphabet. And it's also systematically done. Even if you did do the entire alphabet, do it in order, or do it in some type of order, not just whatever you pulled out of the hat or felt like doing that day. I know some people in programs that are changing weekly, and I truthfully think that unless you can approach it systematically and track it properly, it's probably too much for most people. Now, I think that leads to a big issue that maybe, someone has a couple down weeks or so, and that means that their muscles must have gotten smarter, and that's why they can't, progress. I just got too smart. Again, how silly does that sound? So the reason we're getting stronger is because our bodies are trying to adapt to the stimulus being presented. Muscles want to get stronger and more effective. Because when we work out, we're actually tearing down our muscle. So if your muscles are being torn down and it's difficult just to walk from your bed to the bathroom, your body's like, oh, hey, I should probably make sure that I can at least do that activity. Let me make sure I'm strong enough for that. Well, that's how the gym works. You do sets of 10 pounds, and then your body's like, oh, that was heavy. Let's make sure we're strong enough for that. Cool. Now you do sets of 15 pounds. Oh, that was heavy again. Let's adapt to that. Cool. And you keep year after year after year getting stronger. So one of the easiest ways, I kind of alluded to this earlier, to be able to pull off variation in a very simple, systematic way is I have a spreadsheet, and I'll write out my 12 weeks of exercise. After that 12 weeks, I copy and paste, and then I go through and, let's change this to that, or let's change this cables to dumbbell, or let's make a couple tweaks here and there. It's not something major, but it's a little bit to kind of give some variety to it. That's one way I've done it many, many times for years. Like I said, right now, kind of doing a little bit of an A-B, but it's still that same process of, oh, hey, I haven't done this exercise in a few weeks. Let's do that for 3 or 4 weeks now. Constantly assessing and figuring out, where am I? How can I progress? Probably the crux, other than just the general bothersome from marketing, of why I like less variation than more, is that if you want to get really good at something, you have to do that something. An incline bench press is going to assist your regular bench press. It'll help you with that. But if all you ever did was incline, and then you try to max out in your bench, the regular type of bench, probably not the best idea. I'm going to get into probably what's, the biggest reasons for exercise variation here in a little bit. But first, I want to address that type of training style. It's kind of the king of variation. That's the conjugate training method. For those who don't know, conjugate is sort of a powerlifting type of workout. Westside Barbell had their version of it, and it became huge and really helped a lot of lifters. But from their website, the conjugate method is a weekly strength and conditioning system that decreases physical weakness. It switches through different exercises and physical effort levels to ensure you're continuously getting as strong and as athletic as necessary for whatever objective you set. Its success relies on a training hierarchy that constantly rotates stimulus and intensities to increase positive changes in your physical health while reducing injury risk. Like I said, first of all, that's a powerlifting way of training. That's what that system comes from. But it has produced some very strong individuals, and it can work, but it's not for everyone, and it can be a lot to keep track of. However, you can be plenty strong without all the variation, which speaks that eventually enough is enough, and more variation is not always better. So to quote a systematic review here, Again, find it down below. It seems that very frequent rotation of exercises may not be as effective as moderate variations to induce hypertrophy or getting bigger muscles, potentially because of the difficulty of achieving and quantifying the progressive overload. Progressive overload is exactly what it sounds like. Over time, we must increase the amount of work we're doing, either as reps or sets or weight or times per week, whatever. Likewise, less rest is also another method. Pretty much anything that can be considered variation, you can progressively overload. Back to the study. Also, if the exercise rotation is frequent, example, different exercises every training session, it is likely the individual will experience more prolonged fatigue, conceivably because the exercise-induced muscle damage promoted by unaccustomed stimulus. What that means is when you try to do something for the first time, it usually kind of sucks, and your body has to adjust to it, and you just get sore for longer. Now, I don't know if I can hit this point hard enough, but if you want to be stronger or have bigger muscles or just progress in the gym, you have to progressively overload your movements or your exercises. You have to. You cannot do 3 sets of 10 for 100 pounds for 5 years and expect to wake up tomorrow and be able to do 3 sets of 10 for 200 pounds. You never progressed. So another study that goes along with this, they had 2 groups on an 8-week exercise training program, and the other did a fixed selection, or they exercised randomly each session via a computerized app. And both conditions produced statistically significant increases in bench press and back squat 1 rep max without differences between each group. So it seems like either do the same thing or do different things. It doesn't really matter. However, this is only 8 weeks. Think about how long you potentially could train. Let's say 30 years. 8 weeks is not very long. So that's kind of one of those studies that somebody may quote and say, oh, you don't need to do any variation. But it's like, no, that's not a good study. Like, let's make this much longer. So we may see differences show up if we do 6 months or a year or longer. This study just doesn't tell us that information. I think I'd be lacking if I didn't touch on probably one of the biggest points or reasons for variation. That's just psychological. You're continually getting a hit of that newbie gains or, the quick immediate gains you saw when you first started working out because you're constantly doing something new. You're constantly learning. But that's not necessarily because you're gaining more muscle or getting stronger, but rather your body's just learning those movement patterns, and so you can progress quickly on them, and that gives you that dopamine hit, and you're like, yeah, I'm really progressing, but really your body's just figuring out how to do it. You're not actually getting stronger. It's like if you started going on a different route to work. First couple of days you need a GPS, and after that you kind of figured it out. It's the same thing. First few times you do that new lift, you need a little assistance, so you got to think about it a little bit, and then you finally figure it out. Now, hand in hand with that psychological benefit, and this is, for me, one of the bigger reasons I do some more variation nowadays, it's just fun. Sometimes it's just fun to do something different, or to train a different way, or let's see how strong I can get this variation of the bench press, or whatever. And studies agree that exercise variation can increase motivation because it's something new and exciting. And I think if you're one of those people who need that constant hint of dopamine to help you stay motivated, especially in the beginning or especially when you're like, I just don't want to do this, that's okay because it can be a tool to help build your discipline for the long run. But if you have a goal of benching 200, 300 pounds or running a 5K in under 30 minutes or, whatever fitness goal you have, most of your training needs to be pretty specific for that goal. Again, you can't expect to get massive at the bench press by doing every other variation under the sun of triceps, shoulders, and chest, but not actually doing the bench press. So putting all these studies together, it's okay to have some variation, but it truly depends on what your goals are. If you're looking to be optimal, there is no limit to variations. If you're looking to be optimal, there is a limit on your variations. But if you just want to be healthy and mobile and feel young again, go for it. Really just comes down to your goals. To wrap this up, remember this. Muscles don't get confused. They just adapt and survive.
Thank you for listening to A Healthy Control podcast. You can find us at YouTube at A Healthy Control and make sure to subscribe. You can also reach me at ahealthycontrol@gmail.com with any comments or questions you'd like answered on the show. Reminder, A Healthy Control podcast is for entertainment purposes only and not in lieu of any medical advice. If you have any concerns about your health, please speak to a healthcare provider.